Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
A Time for True Show is sponsored by the Office of Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, a periodontal, dental implant and laser specialist in New York City, for over 40 years. Dr. Fialkoff was honored by the International College of Dentists and Pierre Fauchard, and received the Presidential Lifetime Humanitarian Honor from the White House. Call us at 718-229-3838.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to A Time for True Show. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, and it's a pleasure to have you back with us again today. And tonight, we're going to talk about something that afflicts so many of our country. You know, we talk about violence and the murder rates. We talk about drug abuse. We talk about homelessness. We talk about the economy. But what do all these things lead to but stress, anxiety, feelings of, discomfort, instability, fear, and what will we do? How are we going to solve this? And so it's something that we need to take a look at, because across our country, stress is increasing. It seems almost at the same rate as the intelligence and technology sectors are increasing. It almost seems like we're losing our ability as human beings at the same time that we have unbelievable and marvelous accomplishments with technology, with electronics, with computers, with artificial intelligence. But at what risk, at what cost, at what consequence are we looking at this? If life is supposed to be in harmony and we are supposed to be moving forward for the betterment of all life forms, including obviously us as human beings, then our solutions should lead to those outcomes and not to the increased stresses and all these consequences that we've spoken about at the beginning of the show. So let's put the first slide on for tonight as we deal with stress. And first, we're going to talk about the definition of stress. What is stress according to the Oxford Dictionary? And let's take a look at what the Oxford Dictionary says. Number one, it's a pressure, a tension, a strain. Most people under stress will say they don't feel right. They need to get away. They don't want anyone else to bother them with any more thoughts. They're too much already that they're doing. Anything more is going to tip the cart over, and they don't want that. Number two, stress, a state or condition of mental or emotional strain or tension. So the person is anxious, the person maybe is depressed, the person is angry, the person's antagonistic, they don't feel quite right, they don't sleep well, they have discomfort, they can't seem to be quite there, and this results from adverse or very demanding circumstances, situations. And what are these situations? This topic that we'll be covering tonight, we're going to be covering in two shows. This will be part one. And in part one, we're going to go over what are the solutions that seem to be applied and what are their outcomes and what has been happening in our country as a result of what's being applied. So let's go on to the next slide. As we look at this and we see that this human being is not able to cope with their normal everyday life. Their dynamics of life, which are to say their own life goals, purposes, activities, their families, their partner, spouse, children, extended family, the groups that they work in, whether they're, job, economic, social, religious groups, what's happening on the planet. A lot of people have said that they're very uncomfortable because of the different conflicts that are happening across the globe, in Ukraine, in Israel, tensions between national powers. These lead to stress. So what's happening here is these stresses, unfortunately, we don't know where to put our finger. It's like the little kid in the dam. He wants to stop the leak because he don't want the whole dam to come down, but you don't know where to put your finger. You put it here. Is it over here? Is it your family? Is it your work? Is it what's going on in the world? Is it you? Where do you put your finger? So the person's under stress because there's no solution. And when we don't have solutions, we have stress. So what do we see as a common solution that is applied worldwide? Well, obviously, smoking and vaping. The smoking and vaping, if you put up the second image slide that we have, Buddha, of the person vaping, not the text, but the actual image of the person vaping, aside from smoking, which we showed you in the first image, the other factor that people get involved in is vaping. There we go. And here you see, tends to be the younger generation, although not exclusively, but they tend to vape. They think that vaping is innocuous and that it's a flavoring, it's something nice in this stressful day. And so they vape. Now let's go back to the second text that we had there originally. We'll go with that text now, next one after this one. And we see that they've turned to the smoking, they've turned to the vaping, and the common elements in both of these is found to be the nicotine. They may tell you, or people may tell you, or you may tell me as you're watching the show, I say, well, Dr. Fialkoff, it's just the flavoring. I like the flavoring. Or I just like to have something in my mouth. It's, there's all different things people will say to you. Or I just like the fact that I get away and, I don't really inhale. It's just like, I just have it there. And these are all different comments that I'll get and you'll get from people. But why are we saying then, why are we so sure that the common element is nicotine? Well, let's take a look and go to the next slide. And what we'll see is that nicotine has certain effects. So let's first take a look at smoking and stress. And in that smoking and stress, you could put down vaping, smoking, and stress. And so the vaping and the smoking is kind of a quote unquote self-medication that the person wants to ease their anxiety. They want to ease their uncomfortable sensation, maybe in a new job they have, maybe because they're uncomfortable with their partner, or maybe there's someone that they've been dating. They really wanted to get serious, but doesn't seem going in the right direction. They need to release that anxiety, that uncomfortableness, that doubt that they have. So this nicotine creates an immediate sense of relaxation. And so what happens is the person will use that smoking or that vaping as a way of getting an immediate relaxation to reduce this feeling that's uncomfortable to them. And they don't want to have that tension. They don't want to have that pressure. They don't want to have those thoughts. They want to alleviate those. And they don't really see is how to do that. Let's go to the next slide. And what we'll see is it's very interesting to note because actual scientific research has shown that even though that it seems to be that the people are turning to this to improve their condition, that actually the studies show that the nicotine and the smoking increase the anxiety, they increase the tension, and that the feeling of relief is temporary and very, very quickly gives way to symptoms of dependence and craving, where the person has to have the smoking, has to have the vaping, because they can't naturally or normally without it seem to alleviate their sense of anxiety. I'm sure some of you watching the show say, gosh, yes, that's me, Dr. Fialkov. I have that. And, I'm not going to stop vaping or smoking. And the show is meant as an informative piece, and so that you can make your own decision, because the decisions you'll make are very important. The last thing we want to do is give you any more stress, but we want to give you the factors and the actual facts behind why you're feeling what you're feeling. So these dependency and cravings to the nicotine start when you start trying to go off of them, you get withdrawal symptoms. And so you feel even more uncomfortable. And you say, geez, there's no way. Okay, forget about it. I have to have my cigarette, or I have to have the vape. Let's go on to the next slide. And so now the person is caught. So now what happens? How does nicotine actually work? Well, nicotine works because very soon after you inhale the vape or the cigarette, the nicotine goes up into your brain, and within the brain, it stimulates and triggers release of what's called a neurotransmitter. It's a normal mediator in the body, a normal chemical in the body called dopamine. And dopamine in the body triggers positive feelings. Dopamine is also involved in what's called epinephrine. And most of you know that when you need to get something done and you need that burst of energy, or you need that tremendous high, the epinephrine, or what people call adrenaline or epinephrine being the same thing, gives you that energetic boost, that drive. But if you're constantly in that situation, which is actually called the fight or flight response, it's called the fight or flight response. We're going to be talking more about this. Then what happens is, after a period of time, if you're constantly driving yourself, your body gets exhausted. It can't stay in the fight or flight continuously. It would be like running away from a tiger every single day, the tiger being your stress. In this case, in normal life, you don't see the tiger. So there's a tiger after you, but you don't even see him. So it's even more stressful. And this is why you don't want to have that fight or flight response continually all day long, where you're releasing adrenaline from your body. Eventually, your adrenal glands are going to exhaust, fatigue. You're going to run into other physical problems. And but the dopamine originally with the nicotine gets released and does trigger positive responses in the body, positive feelings. And it's often found that people who are depressed have a low dopamine level. And so they're depressed, which would make sense, because if they don't have the dopamine, they're not going to feel well, and they have depression. And then they use cigarettes to try to increase their dopamine levels. They may not realize that scientifically, but in reality, that's what they're trying to do. And unfortunately, it works temporarily. And since they were depressed to begin with and their bodies were low in the dopamine, now when they get addicted, the body makes even less than they did originally when they were depressed. And the vaping and the smoking work less so than they did before. So now the person is even in a worse off state. And this is a situation that many, many people find themselves in all across the country. Let's take a look at the next image, please. Now, so here we have what's happening is that initially, like with any drug, every drug has a cycle. If you take a little bit, it stimulates you, like coffee. If you take a little bit of coffee, you get wide awake. But if you keep taking coffee and you take 4 or 5 cups now, it doesn't stimulate you anymore. Caffeine is a drug. And so what happens is the more coffee you take, actually the coffee starts actually relaxing or even depressing you slightly because you're taking even more coffee. And the cycle of the drug is stimulation, then depression. If you were to continually drink coffee and you could drink enough of it, obviously you all realize that you will get sick to your stomach. You're not going to go into a coma. You're not going to die from coffee poisoning, but you're going to get sick. It's too much for the body. So the cycle of the drug again is stimulation initially, depression secondarily as you keep taking more and more of it. And then when you have very high levels, then you start getting sickness, coma, or death, depending on the drug that you're using. If you were doing cocaine, you would have coma and death. If you're doing caffeine, you would just get depression and then be sick to your stomach. And this would be the cycle of any drug. So it's the same thing with smoking or nicotine. Originally, the nicotine will stimulate you, but then your body gets used to it. Now your body starts shutting down its own manufacture of the dopamine. You still need to smoke, but now you're smoking just to try and stay level. As it goes on more and more, as the cycle of all of the drugs, that nicotine you'll need tremendous amount of, which is what you see some people smoking 1-2 packs a day and then running into all sorts of pulmonary problems, cardiac problems, dying, having cancer, because the levels that they're taking in order to just feel normal now, not even to feel good, just to feel normal, are much too high and toxic to the body. They've reached that third stage of drug interaction with the body. The other thing that's important to state with all this is that when you're doing this, there's a very simple philosophy or principle that's behind all this is this. Those things that you master and those things that you can create yourself and produce yourself naturally are things that you control, that you feel confidence over, that you feel stable over, that you don't feel stress about because you know you can control them. And even though it seems very simple, it's very interesting how the body works on the same principle. Is if the body and you start feeling that you need to have more of, let's say, just the nicotine, or let's say more of the vaping. What happens now, the keeps getting more and more weak, just as if you didn't exercise. You originally were in great shape, you stopped exercising, and as you stopped exercising, you got weaker and weaker. Now you want to do something, so maybe you started taking some hormones, or you started taking some additives or different supplements in order to compensate for the fact that you let yourself get weaker by not exercising in a routine manner and in a good fashion. So the same thing happens really with all fields of life. Really, those things that we let go out of our control. And now things that were under our control go out of our control. Things that we had moving in the right direction, we take our attention off of them, we let them go, and all of a sudden they start going wrong. And now you have less control and you have to find other solutions. Really, it's the same thing with a drug. It's just the drug going through the same sequence of the person either being competent, in control, fully responsible for what's going on around them, or they decided to back off a little bit or put something over there to do, and they didn't want to get as involved, which is a great thing because sometimes you need a little time off. But they did that in a chronic fashion, and now they become the victim of what they created. And really, if you really look at that, it's a very simple principle in life. And sometimes people say you reap what you sow. In other words, you sow or you plant seeds into the ground, and the apple tree that you take care of, you'll reap the fruits off of the apple tree. And this is what you're going to get back. But when that cycle doesn't occur, then you are total effect. Now, so let's go on now back onto the smoking as a stress relief. And you'll see that the smoking encourages in the brain a switch off of its mechanism of making dopamine. As I said to you, the brain and central nervous system normally will make dopamine. And so when it makes dopamine, the person is fine. They're under control. But now with smoking, if for whatever reasons the person has started to smoke, that starts switching off the natural body production. So the factory, which normally produced a certain amount of, let's say, almonds, there were a certain amount of almond jars that came out of that factory, and now it's producing less of them. But you know, the factory, in order to be viable, needs to sell a certain amount, but it doesn't have that amount to sell. So now it has to borrow money to make solutions, or maybe to buy almonds from some other area to sell the almonds underneath their brand name. And you get the same reaction in life, which is just expanded into a group dynamic or a business dynamic, but the same principle. So now what happens is when the brain shuts off its mechanism for making dopamine, what happens in the long term now, the supply decreases. As the supply decreases, the person is going to want to feel comfortable. So their only solution at that point is to smoke more, because the body has become dependent or addicted. And so now it's going to exert physiologic and physical and emotional stresses on that person. And it's funny, but one person was telling me the other day, he says, you know, that's what I have in my job because, you know, I run this business, and a few of the employees I had who were good left me. Unfortunately, they retired. And the new ones that I got, you know, they really didn't work the same, but they wanted to get paid more and more. And I didn't know what to do because I couldn't find any employees. And so I hired them and I paid them more. But then it got worse and worse, and they worked less and less. And I'm paying more and more. And I don't feel good as the job. I really want to quit my job. I want to give up the business. I want to go work for somebody else. That's another principle in action, the same as what you've seen with the smoking. So, you know, the show is really about finding ourselves the truth of what's going on in our lives to make things better. And so it's important to realize that what we're going over today is how to handle stress. We're using smoking or the nicotine as an example, but in reality, we're looking at all the different factors of your life, your family life, your business life, and whatever. Because the reality is as you back off and as you don't control, don't exert discipline, don't lead your area, then you start going in reverse and start becoming more of the effect of those areas, getting increased stress in your areas. And then you're looking for solutions because the simplistic solutions have disappeared from your very face, from your very eyes. They don't seem to be existent. It seems like it's an impossible situation. And sometimes we get used to situations, which has happened even in our country. As the economy has been affected, why has it been affected? As drugs have become more and more prevalent, when a person is on drugs, one thing they're not doing is producing. If the country's gross national production is going to decrease and the drug use is going to increase, then inflation will increase because there'll be less products in the country that are valuable. As the drugs increase, the quality of the products will decrease. So maybe the American product, which was once known as such a wonderful product, is now not in such a favorable light compared to other countries' products. And so we have more competition, and we say, what's happened? Or and maybe if we look at it in a more antagonistic way, we could look at it that maybe they're doing something to us, or this country has robbed our secrets, when in reality, we, by our own actions of not producing, of not creating, not having quality in mind, not helping with our product, not actually helping someone else, but looking just to get something quickly to satisfy our urge, like a drug addict with their addiction, then we end up in the same situation. And remember, the cycle of a drug can happen in the cycle of anyone. So that initial stimulation, depression, and then death can occur in groups, can occur in nations, can occur really on any level that you look at, whether high or low. So this is what's happening now with the brain. Is the brain got addicted to nicotine, and now it stops making dopamine, and the person's addicted to the nicotine. They need to have a nicotine, and they have a fit if they don't have it. Next slide. So there you go. There's a cycle as we've gone over it. At first, you get improved mood, as you do with any drug. You get decreased anger and stress, as you do with any drug. At first, it seems wonderful. It's like the first date. Your first date's wonderful, but it's not, as all of us know, it's not really real. You're going to really find out more about your relationship and the other person as time goes on. As the reality hits and you really deal, you either really go forward and you control and you get agreements and you move forward in your relationship, or the original high is gone, and so you just blow it off and go on to your next relationship. And then again, that's like going from one drug to another. Again, I'll make a lot of analogies for you. I'll give you a lot of similarities for you, so you can actually get something out of this program in terms of your stress. Let's go on to the next slide. And the next slide, something important to realize that obviously, if someone was depressed to begin with, more than likely, aside from stress, there were things that they weren't doing optimally to get into that state over a long period of time. It didn't happen in one day. Obviously, anyone could have a tremendous accident. It's horrible. Yes, they could get depressed very quickly. Someone could lose their whole family for some, physical reason or horrible disease like we had with COVID. But in normality, it's over a period of time that someone will get depressed. It won't happen instantaneously. And so when someone is depressed, it's been over a long period of time. So their body has started to make less of the dopamine, which you saw before scientifically is a result of being depressed. And so what's happening is there's something going on with that person that's affecting them so that they're not really optimally doing what they did before, which is what we're going to be going over in part 2 of this show, because we're going to continue with part 2 and actually then start handling, well, if we can't do the vaping, if the smoking is not really a solution, if just eating and then smoking so that you don't gain weight, because the smoking does actually increase your energy consumption, so you won't gain weight. But this is a well-known factor. But at what cost are you doing this? At the cost of possibly cancer, at the cause of being addicted and not having a normal life, at what cost? And what causes are occurring here? What consequences are occurring here? And so we need to take a look at that. So we want to actually not be depressed to begin with. Let's go on to the next slide. We don't want to have that stress. So what is it that led to that stress? What is it that led to the depression? Because when you're depressed, everything is more difficult for you. And with smoking in particular, it'll be very difficult for you to stop smoking. Why? Because the smoking is one of your last ways of you increasing your dopamine and your serotonin. And so what happens is if you don't have that, you're looking for something and you're going to need another way. You're going to find another drug, or you're going to see someone and have a prescribed drug. But really the reasons are there. And I think now that you've heard the show, heard the principles, probably by now you can see and you can start deciphering the puzzle yourself, and you start getting some kind of idea like, oh, okay, stress. So stress is like I don't have enough fruit to eat. And I need the fruits to eat to get my vitamin C. And I like fruits because they're tasty. But in order to get them, I'm going to have to grow some apple trees. So I guess I'm going to have to change my habits. And maybe I'm going to plant some in my yard. Or maybe I'm going to help one of my friends who has a few trees on his lawn and he'll share some with me. But you'll do something that's a little more proactive, a little more under your control, and you'll have a little more feeling of, okay, I can guide my ship. I am the person guiding my life. There's not just the effect of everything. So I hope this has helped you up to this point, and we will continue with the next show, part 2 of this stress in our lives. And we'll see you on the next episode of A Time for Truth show with the solutions for your stress. Good night for now.
This show was sponsored by A Time for Truth Foundation Incorporated as a community service.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet